Elon Musk's Chapter 4, The Seeker, Pretoria, the 1980s. Existential crisis. When Musk was young, his mother started taking him to Sunday school at the local Anglican church, where she was a teacher. It did not go well. She would tell her class stories from the Bible, and he would question them. What do you mean the waters parted? He asked. That's not possible. When she told the story of Jesus feeding the crowd with loaves and fishes, he countered that things cannot materialize out of nothing. Having been baptized, he was expected to take communion, but he began questioning that as well. I took the blood and body of Christ, which is weird when you're a kid, he says. I said, what the hell is this? Is this a weird metaphor for cannibalism? May decided to let Elon stay home and read on Sunday mornings. His father, who was more God fearing, told Elon that there were things that could not be known through our limited senses and minds. There are no atheist pilots, he would say, and Elon would add, there are no atheists at exam time. But Elon came to believe early on that science would explain things, so there were no need to conquer up a creator or deity that would intervene in our lives. When he reached his teens, it began to dawn on him that something was missing. Both the religious and the scientific explanations of existence, he says, did not address the really big questions such as where did the universe come from and why does it exist? Physics could teach everything about the universe except why. That led to what he calls his adolescence existential crisis. I began trying to figure out what the meaning of life in the universe was, he says. And I got real depressed about it. Maybe life may be have no meaning. Like a good bookworm, he addressed these questions through reading. At first, he made the typical mistake of angry adolescents and read existential philosophers such as Nietzsche, Heidegger, and Schopenhauer. This had the effect of turning confusion into despair. I do not recommend reading this shit as a teenager, he says. Fortunately, he was saved by science fiction, that wellspring of wisdom for game playing kids with intellect and hyperdrive. He plowed through the entire sci fi section at his school and local library, then pushed the librarians to order more. One of his favorites was Robert Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, a novel about lunar penal colony. It is managed by a supercomputer nicknamed Mike that is able to acquire self-awareness and a sense of humor. The computer sacrifices its life during a rebellion at the penal colony. The book explores an issue that would become central to Musk's life. Will artificial intelligence develop in ways that benefit and protect humanity, or will machines develop intentions of their own and become a threat to humans? That topic is central to what became another one of his favorites, Isaac Asimov's robot stories. The tales formulate laws of robotics that are designed to make sure robots do not get out of control. In the final scene of the 1985 novel Robots and Empire, Asimov expounds the most fundamental of these rules, dubbed the zeroth law. A robot may not harm humanity, or through inaction allow humanity to become harm. The heroes of Asimov's Foundation series of books develop a plan to send settlers to distant regions of the galaxy to preserve human consciousness in the face of an impending dark age. More than 30 years later, Musk unleashed a random tweet about how these ideas motivated his quest to make humans a spacefaring species and to harness artificial intelligence to be at the service of humans. Foundation series and Zeroth Law are fundamental to creation of SpaceX. The Hitchhiker's Guide, the science fiction book that most influences Wonder Years and Douglas Adams. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The jaunty and rare tale helped shape Musk's philosophy and added a dollop of droll humor to his serious mien. The Hitchhiker's Guide, he says, helped me out of my existential depression, and I soon realized it was an amazing funny in all sorts of subtle ways. The story involves a human named Arthur Dent, who is rescued by a passing spaceship seconds before the Earth is destroyed by an alien civilization that is built in a hyperspace highway. Along with his alien rescuer, Dent explores various nooks and crannies of the galaxy, which is run by a two-headed president who had turned unfaithful on formality into an art form. The intention of the galaxy are to figure out the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. And they build a supercomputer that, after 7 million years, spouts out the answer 42. When that provokes a befuddled Hal, the computer replies, "That quite definitely is the answer. I think the problem, to be quite honest, is with you, is that you're never actually known what the question is." That lesson stuck with Musk. I took from the book that we needed to extend the scope of consciousness so that we are better able to ask the questions about the answer, which is the universe, he says. The Hitchhiker's Guide, combined with Musk's later immersion into video and tabletop simulation games, led to a lifelong fascination with the tantalizing thought that we might merely be pawns in a simulation devised by some higher order beings. As Douglas Adams writes, this is a theory which states that if ever anyone discovers exactly what the universe is for and why it is here, it will instantly disappear and be replaced by something even more bizarre and inexplicable. There's another theory which states that this has already happened. Blastar. In the late 1970s, the role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons became a popular obsession among the global tribe of geeks. Elon, Kimball, and their arrived cousins immersed themselves in the game, which involves sitting around a table guided by character sheets and the roll of dice, embarking on fantasy adventures. One of the players serves as the dungeon master, referring the action. Elon usually played the dungeon master and surprisingly did it with gentleness. Even as a kid, Elon had a bunch of different demeanors and moods, says his cousin Peter Reeve. As a dungeon master, he was incredibly patient, which is not, in my experience, always his default personality, if you know what I mean. It happens sometimes, and it's so beautiful when it does. Instead of pressuring his brothers and cousins, he would turn very analytical to describe the options they had in each situation. Together, they entered a tournament in Johannesburg, at which they were the youngest players. The tournament's dungeon master assigned their mission. You have to save this woman by figuring out who in the game is the bad guy and killing him. Elon looked at the dungeon master and said, "I think you're the bad guy." And so they killed him. Elon was right, and the game, which was supposed to last a few hours, was over. The organizers accused them of somewhat cheating, and at first tried to deny them the prize, but Musk prevailed. "These guys were idiots," he says. "It was so obvious." Musk saw his first computer around the time he turned 11. He was in a shopping mall in Johannesburg, and he stood there for minutes just staring at it. "I had read computer magazines," he said, "but I had never actually seen a computer before." As with the motorcycle, he hounded his father to get him one. Arrow was bizarrely averse to computers, claiming they were good only for time-wasting games, not engineering. So Elon saved his money from odd jobs and bought a Commodore VIC-20, one of the earliest personal computers. It could play games such as Galaxy and Alpha Blaster, in which a player attempts to protect Earth from alien invaders. The computer came with a course on how to launch in BASIC that involved 60 hours of lesson. "I did it in 3 days, barely sleeping," he remembers. A few months later, he tore out an ad for a conference on personal computers at the university and told his father he wanted to attend. Again, his father balked. It was an expensive seminar of about 400 and not meant for children. Elon replied that it was essential and just stood there next to his father, staring. Over the next few days, Elon would pull the ad out of his pocket and renew his demand. Finally, his father was able to talk to the university into giving a discounted price for Elon to stand in the back. When Arrow came to pick him up at the end, he found Elon engaging with 3 of the professors. This boy must get a new computer, one of them declared. After he aced a programming skills test at his school, he got an IBM PC/XT and taught himself to program using Pascal and Turbo C++. At age 13, he was able to create a video game which he named Blastar using 1, 2, 3 line of basic and some simple assembly language to get the graphics to work. He submitted it to PC and Office Technology magazine, and it appeared in the December 1984 issue with a short introduction explaining, in this game you have to destroy an alien space freighter which is carrying deadly hydrogen bombs and status beam machines. Although it's unclear what a status beam machine is, the concept sounds cool. The magazine paid him $500, and he proceeded to sell it two other games, one like Donkey Kong and the other stimulating roulette and blackjack. Thus began a lifelong addiction to video games. If you're playing with Elon, you play pretty much nonstop until finally you have to eat. Peter Rive says, on one trip to Durban, Elon figured out how to hack the games in a mall. He was able to hotwire the system so that they could play for hours without using any coins. He then came up with a grander idea. The cousins could create a video game arcade of their own. We knew exactly which games were the most popular, so it seemed like a sure thing, Elon says. He figured out how the cash flow could finance the machines. But when the boys tried to get the city permits, they were told they needed someone over the age of 18 to sign the application. Kimball, who had filled out the 30 pages of forms, decided that they couldn't ask Errol. He was just too hard of a human, Kimball says. So we went to Russ and Pete's dad, and he flipped out. That basically shut off the whole thing down. Chapter 5, Escape Velocity, leaving South Africa in 1989. Jekyll and Hyde. At age 17, after 7 years of living with his father, Elon realized that he would have to escape. Life with him had become increasingly unnerving. There were times when Earl would be jovial and fun, but occasionally he would become dark, verbally abusive, and possessed by fantasies and conspiracies. His mood could change in a dime, Tosca says. Everything could be super, then within a second he would be vicious and spewing abuse. It was almost as if he had a split personality. 1 minute he could be super friendly, Kimball says, and the next he would be screaming at you, lecturing you for hours, literally 2 or 3 hours, while he forced you to just stand there, calling you worthless, pathetic, making scarring and evil comments, not allowing you to leave. Elon's cousins became reluctant to visit. You never knew what you were going in for. Peter Reeve says, sometimes Earl would be like, I just got some new motorbikes, so let's jump on them. At other times, he would be angry and threatening, and, oh, fuck, maybe you make you clean the toilets with a toothbrush. When Peter tells me this, he pauses for a moment, and then a bit hesitantly notes that Elon sometimes have similar mood swings. When Elon's in a good mood, it's like the coolest, funniest thing in the world. And when he's in a bad mood, he goes really dark, and you're just walking on eggshells. One day, Peter came to the house and found Earl sitting in his underwear at the kitchen table with a plastic roulette wheel. He was trying to see whether microwaves could affect it. He would spin the wheel, mark down the result, then spin it and put it in the microwave oven and record the result. It was nuts, Peterson. Earl had become convinced that he could find a system for beating the game. He dragged Elon to the Pretoria Casino many times, dressing him up so that he looked older than 16, and had him write down the numbers, while Earl used a calculator hidden under a betting card. Elon went to the library and read a few books on roulette, and even wrote a roulette simulation program on his computer. He then tried to convince his father that none of his schemes would work, but Earl believed that he had found a deeper truth about probability, and as he later described it to me, an almost total solution to what is called randomness. When I asked him to explain it, he said, there are no random events or chance. All events follow the Fibonacci sequence, like the Mandelbrot set. I went on to discover the relationship between chance and the Fibonacci sequence. This is a subject for a scientific paper. If I share it, all activities relying on chance will be ruined. So I am in doubt as to doing that. I'm not quite sure what all that means. Neither is Elon. I don't know how he went from being great or at engineering to believing in witchcraft, but he somehow made that evolution. Arrow can be very forceful and occasionally convincing. He changes reality around him, Kimball says. He would literally make up things, but he actually believes his own false reality. Sometimes Arrow would make sweeping assertions to his kids that were unconnected to facts, such as insisting that in the United States, the president is considered divine and cannot be criticized. At other times, he would weave fanciful tales that cast himself as either the hero or the victim. All would be asserted with such conviction that Elon and Kimball would find themselves questioning their own view of reality. Can you imagine growing up like that? Kimball asks. It was mental torture and it affects you. You end up asking, what is reality? I find myself getting caught up in Earl's tangled webs in a series of calls and emails over the course of 2 years. He gave me varying accounts of his relationship with and his feelings for his kids, May and his stepdaughter, with whom he would have 2 children. More on that later. Elon and Kimball have developed their own narrative about what I was like, and it doesn't accord with the facts, he claims. Their tales about him being psychologically abusive, he insists, are told to please their mother. But when I press him, he tells me to go on with their version. I don't care if they choose a different narrative. As long as they are happy, I have no desire for it to be my word versus theirs. Let them have the floor. When talking about his father, Elon will sometimes let loose a laugh, a somewhat harsh and bitter one. It's similar to the laugh that his father has. Some of the words Elon uses, the same way he stares, his sudden transitions from light to dark to light, remind his family members of the arrow simmering inside of him. I would see shades of these horrible stories Elon told me surface in his own behavior, says Justine, Elon's first wife. It made me realize how difficult it is not to be shaped by what we grow up with, even when that's not what we want. Every now and then she dared to say something like, "You're turning into your father," she explains. It was our code phrase to warn him that he was going into the realm of darkness. But Justine says that Elon, who was always emotionally invested in their children, is different from his father in a fundamental way. With Arrow, there was a sense that really bad things could happen around him, whereas if the zombie apocalypse happened, you'd want to be on Elon's team, because he would figure out a way to get those zombies in line. He can be very harsh, but at the end of the day, you can trust him to find a way to prevail. In order for that to happen, he had to move on. It was time to leave South Africa. A one-way ticket. Musk began pushing both his mother and father, trying to convince them to move to the United States and take him and his siblings. Neither was interested, so then I was like, well, I'm just going to go by myself, he says. He first tried to get a U.S. citizenship on the grounds that his mother's father had been born in Minnesota, but that failed because his mother had been born in Canada and had never acclaimed U.S. citizenship. So he concluded about getting to Canada might be an easier first step. He went to the Canadian consulate on his own, got an application forms for the passport, and filled them out, not only for himself, but for his mother, brother, and sister, but not father. The approvals came through in late May 1989. I would have left the next morning, but the airline tickets were cheaper then if you bought them 14 days in advance, he says. So I had to wait those 2 weeks. On June 11, 1989, about 2 weeks shy of his 18th birthday, he had dinner at Pretoria's finest restaurant. Cynthia with his father's and siblings, who then drove him to the Johannesburg airport. You'll be back in a few months, Elon says his father told him contemptuously. You'll never be successful. As usual, Errol has his own version of the story in which he was the action hero. According to him, Elon became seriously depressed during his senior year of high school. His despair reached a head-on Republic Day, May 31st, 1989. His family was preparing to watch the parade, but Elon refused to get out of bed. His father leaned against the big desk in Elon's room with it as a well-used computer and asked, "Do you want to go and study in America?" Elon perked up. "Yes," he answered. Errol claims it was my idea up until then. He had never said that he wanted to go to America. So I said, "Well, tomorrow you should go and see the American culture attaché, who was a friend of mine from Rotary." His father's accountant, Elon says, was just another of his elaborate fantasies casting him as a hero in this case. It was provably false. By Republic Day 1989, Elon had already gotten a Canadian passport and purchased his airline ticket. Chapter 6, Canada, 1989. Immigrant. A myth has grown that Musk, because his father was on and off successful, arrived in North America in 1989 with a lot of money, perhaps, pockets filled with emeralds. Errol at times encouraged that perception, but in fact, what Errol got from the Zambian emerald mine had become worthless years earlier. When Elon left South Africa, his father gave him $2,000 in traveler's checks, and his mother provided him with another $2,000 by cashing out a stock account she had opened with the money she won in a beauty contest as a teenager. Otherwise, what he mainly had with him when he arrived in Montreal was a list of his mother's relatives he had never met. He planned to call his mother's uncle, but discovered that he had left Montreal, so he went to a youth hostel where he shared a room with 5 other people. I was used to South Africa, where people will just rob and kill you, he says, so I slept in my backpack until I realized that not everyone was a murderer. He wandered the town, marveling that people did not have bars on their windows. After a week, he bought a $100 Greyhound Discovery Pass that allowed him to travel by bus anywhere in Canada for 6 months. He had a second cousin his age, Mark Tilloon, who lived on a farm in Saskatchewan, Providence, not far from Moose Jaw, where his grandparents had lived. So he headed there. It was more than 1,700 miles from Montreal. The bus, which stopped at every hamlet, took days to wander across Canada. At one stop, he got off to find lunch, and just as the bus was leaving, ran to jump back on. Unfortunately, the driver had taken off his suitcase with his traveler's checks and clothes. All he had now was a knapsack of books he carried everywhere. The difficulty of getting traveler's checks replaced, it took weeks, was an early taste of how the financial payment systems needed distribution. When he got to the town near his cousin's farm, he used some of the change he had in his pocket to call. "Hey, it's Elon, your cousin from South Africa," he said. "I'm at the bus station." The cousin showed up with his father, took him to a Sizzler steakhouse, and invited him to stay at their wheat farm, where he was put to work. Cleaning grain bins and helping to raise a barn. There he celebrated his 18th birthday with a cake that they baked with "Happy Birthday, Elon" written in chocolate icing. After 6 weeks, he got back on the bus and headed for Vancouver, another 1,000 miles away, to stay with his mother's half-brothers. When he went to an employment office, he saw that most jobs paid $5 an hour, but there was one that paid $18 an hour, cleaning out the boilers in the lumber mill. This involved donning a hazmat suit and shimmying through a small tunnel that led to the chamber where the wood pulp was being boiled, while shoveling out the lime that had caked on the walls. If the person at the end of the tunnel didn't remove the goo fast enough, you would be trapped while sweating your guts out, he recalls. It was like Dickinson's steampunk nightmare filled with dark pipes and the sound of jackhammers. May and Tosca. While Elon was in Vancouver, May Musk flew from South Africa, having decided that she wanted to move as well. She sent back scouting reports to Tosca. Vancouver was too cold and rainy, she wrote. Montreal was exciting, but people there spoke French. Toronto, she concluded, was where they would go. Tosca promptly sold their house and furniture in South Africa when she joined their mother in Toronto, where Elon also moved. Kimball stayed behind in Pretoria to finish his last year in high school. At first, they all lived in a one-bedroom apartment where Tosca and his mother shared a bed while Elon slept on the couch. There was little money. May remembers crying when she spilled some milk because she didn't have enough to buy any more. Tosca got a job at a hamburger joint, Elon as an intern in Microsoft's Toronto office, and May at the university, a modeling agency, as a diet consultant. I worked every day and also 4 nights a week, she says. I took off one afternoon, Sunday, to do the laundry and get groceries. I didn't even know what my kids were doing because I was hardly at home. After a few months, they were making enough money to afford a rent-controlled 3-bedroom apartment. It had felt wallpaper, which May insisted that Elon rip down, and a horrid carpet. They were going to buy a $200 replacement carpet, but Tosca insisted on a thicker one for $300 because Kimball and their cousin Peter were coming over to join them and would sleep on the floor. Their second big purchase was a computer for Elon. He had no friends or social life in Toronto, and he spent most of his time reading or working on the computer. Tosca, on the contrary, was a saucy teenager eager to go out. "I'm coming with you," Elon would declare, not wanting to be lonely. "No, you're not," she would reply. But when he insisted, she ordered, "You have to stay 10 feet away from me at all times." He did. He would walk behind her and her friends, carrying a book to read whenever they went into a club or party. Chapter 7, Queens, Kingston, Ontario, 1990 to 1991. Industrial relations. Musk's college admissions test scores were not especially notable. On his second round of the SAT scores, he got a 670 out of an 800 on his verbal exam and a 730 on math. He narrowed his choices on two universities that were on easy drive from Toronto, Waterloo and Queen's. Waterloo was definitely better for engineering, but it didn't seem like a great from a social standpoint, he says. There were few girls there. He felt he knew computer science and engineering as well as any of the professors at both places, but he desperately desired a social life. "I didn't want to spend my undergraduate time with a bunch of dudes." So in the fall of 1990, he enrolled at Queen's. He was placed on the international floor of one of the dorms, where on the first day he met a student named Novid Farouk, who became his first real and lasting friend outside of his family. Farouk's father was Pakistani and his mother Canadian, and he was raised in Nigeria and Switzerland, where his parents worked for United Nations organizations. Like Elon, he had made no close friends in high school. At Queen's, he and Musk quickly bonded over their interest in computer and board games, obscure history, and science fiction. "For me and Elon," Fork says, "it was probably the first place we were socially acceptable and could be ourselves." During his first year, Musk got A's in business, economics, calculus, and computer programming, but he got B's in accounting, Spanish, and industrial relationships. The following year, he took another course in industrial relations, which studies the dealings between workers and management. Again, he got a B. He later told the Queen's Alumni magazine that the most important thing he learned during his 2 years there was how to work collaboratively with smart people and make use of the Socratic method to achieve commonality of purpose, a skill like those of the industrial relations that future colleagues would notice hadn't been only partly honed. He was more interested in late-night philosophy discussions about the meaning of life. "I was really hungry for that," he says, "because until then I had no friends I could talk to about these things." But most of all, he became immersed with Farouk at his side in the world of board and computer games, strategy games. "What you're doing is not rational," Musk explained in his flat monotone. "You're actually hurting yourself." He and Farouk were playing the strategy board game Diplomacy with friends in their dorm, and one of the players was allying himself with another against Musk. "If you do this, I will turn your allies against you and inflict pain on you." Musk tended to win. Fork says by being convincing in his negotiations and threats. Musk had enjoyed all types of video games as a teenager in South Africa, including first-person shooters and adventure quests. But at college, he became more focused on the genre known as strategy games, ones that involved two or more players competing to build an empire using high-level strategy, resource management, supply chain logistics, and tactical thinking. Strategy games, those played on a board game, and then those for computers, would become central to Musk's life. From the ancient art of war, which he played as a teen in South Africa, to his addiction to the Battle of Philotopia, 3 decades later, he relished the complex planning and competitive management of resources that are required to prevail. Immersing himself in these games for hours became the way he relaxed, escaped stress, and honed his tactical skills and strategic thinking for business. While he was at Queen's, the first great computer-based strategy game was released, Civilization. In it, players compete to build a society from prehistory to the present by choosing what technologies to develop and production facilities to build. Musk moved his desk so that he could sit on his bed and Fork on a chair to face off and play the game. We completely entered a zone for hours until we were exhausted, Fork says. They moved on to Warcraft, Auras, and Humans, where a key part of the strategy is to develop a sustainable supply of resources, such as metals from mines. After hours of playing, they would take a break for a meal, and Elon would describe the moment in the game where he knew he was going to win. I am wired for war, he told Fork. One classic Queens used a strategy game in which teams competed in simulation of growing a business. The players could decide the prices of the products, the amount spent on advertising, what profits to plow back into research and other variables. Musk figured out how to reverse engineering the logic that controlled the simulation, so he was able to win every time. Bank training. When Kimball moved to Canada and joined Elon as a student at Queen's, the brothers developed a routine. They would read the newspaper and pick out the person they found most interesting. Elon was not one of those eager beaver types who liked to attract and charm mentors. So the more gregarious, Kimball took the lead in cold calling the person. If we were able to get through on the phone, they usually would have lunch with us, he says. One they picked was Peter Nicholson, the executive in charge of strategic planning at Scotiabank. Nicholson was an engineer with a master's degree in physics and PhD in math. When Kimball got through to him, he agreed to have lunch with the boys. Their mother took them out shopping at Eaton's department store, where the purchase of a $99 suit got you a free shirt and tie. At lunch, they discussed philosophy and physics and the nature of the universe. Nicholson offered them summer jobs, inviting Elon to work with him on his 3-person strategic planning team. Nicholson, then 49, and Elon had fun together solving math puzzles and weird equations. I am interested in the philosophy side of physics and how it related to reality, Nicholson says. I don't have a lot of other people to talk to about these things. They also discussed what had become Musk's passion, space travel. When Elon went with Nicholson's daughter, Christy, to a party one evening, his first question was, "Do you ever think about electric cars?" As he later admitted, it was not the world's best come-on line. One topic Musk researched for Nicholson was Latin America debt. Banks had made billions in loans to countries such as Brazil and Mexico that could not be repaid, and in 1989, the U.S. Treasury Secretary Nicholas Brady packaged these debt obligations into tradable securities known as Brady bonds. Because these bonds were backed by the U.S. government, Musk believed that they would always be worth 50 cents on the dollar. However, some were selling as low as 20 cents. Musk figured that Scotiabank could make billions by buying the bonds at that cheap price, and he called the Goldman Sachs trade desk in the New York to make sure they were available. "Yeah, how much you want?" the grief trader on the phone responded. "Would it be possible to get $5 million?" Musk asked, putting on a deep and serious voice. When the trader said that would be no problem, Musk quickly hung up. "I was like, jackpot, no lose proposition here," he says. "I ran to tell Peter about it and thought they would give me some money to do it, but the bank rejected the idea. The CEO said it already held too much Latin American debt." "Well, this is just insane," Musk told himself. "Is this how banks think?" Nicholson says that Scotiabank was navigating the Latin American debt situation using its own methods, which worked better. He came away with an impression that the bank was a lot dumber than in fact it was, Nicholson said. But that was a good thing because it gave him a healthy disrespect for the financial industry and the audacity to eventually start what became PayPal. Musk also drew another lesson from his time at Scotiabank. He did not like, nor was he good at, working for other people. It was not in his nature to be deferential or to assume that others might know more than he did.